Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Mike Kraemer, who was a local church pastor and is now the district superintendent of Iowa. And he shares his heart, his upbringing, and how God is using him and how the church can be used by God in our world today. So let's get into the conversation with Mike. Mike, thank you for being on our podcast today. We appreciate you taking the time to join us and share your story and what God has done in your life. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be part of this, man. Thanks for asking me.
So as we begin, I wonder if you could share a little bit about kind of your background, your life as a pastor's kid growing up, just kind of, and maybe how that has shaped you as a pastor, as a parent, and a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, definitely. I grew up in North Dakota. My dad was a North Dakota farmer that got saved in his early 20s and got a definite call into ministry when he was out farming one day and came home and, they literally sold the farm kind of story and went off to Bible college. And I was born at Bible college. So I give my brothers a hard time that I'm the golden child of my family. But I grew up in the church. My dad was the pastor all my life. And, since I've been an adult, I've encountered a lot of pastors' kids, and I hear all these difficult stories from a lot of them. But I can honestly say, I didn't have those stories. I'm super grateful that I grew up in the home that I grew up in. And I think what was a big deal as I look back at it now is my dad didn't ever pretend to be anybody different than who he was. He was the real deal. And I can remember thinking as a kid, sitting in the old pews of the church, knowing that everything my dad said up there, he believed and he lived out. And so I would say that growing up in that atmosphere, and there's 7 of us kids in my house, so I can't imagine, being a parent raising that many kids. And my mom got us ready for church on Sunday morning because my dad was there early. But church was always a positive part of my life. It was always really good. I feel maybe sometimes I feel like we were blessed in that we were always part of good churches that loved on us, that were always, gracious to us. And my dad never put any unrealistic expectations on us because we were pastors' kids. He just let us be us. And so church has always been a positive part of my life, which I know definitely has helped shape my ministry, even how I raise my kids. I want to be able to stand up in front of the people that I speak to and know that when my family's out there, they're not scratching their head saying, no, Dad doesn't live this out, And so I'd say that's how it shaped my ministry. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and so you were called to ministry. Can you share your call with us today?
Yep, definitely. When I look back at my life, I have felt that call in my life from the time I was little. I couldn't tell you age. I couldn't tell you a specific time where God called me into ministry. But I always had in my heart that God was calling me into ministry. And as a kid, that was all right. As a kid, I always looked up to my dad. My dad is, my hero. I love my dad. And so as a kid, that was always I want to be like my dad, But then you get into middle school and high school, and everybody's talking about what they want to do, and they want to be doctors and nurses and lawyers and engineers. And then, what do I want to do? To be honest with you, pastor wasn't the cool thing, I wrestled with it a little bit. And then I had some insecurities in my life that I really wrestled with. I didn't feel comfortable speaking in front of people. I was kind of a shy kid, very shy. And then I'd look at my dad up there preaching, and I would think, I can't do that, you know. I was that kid that, you know, in speech class, I always signed up for the last speech and all the way up to that speech, I was a nervous wreck. And so I had some things that I wrestled with, but I can remember a specific time when we had an evangelist come to our church. We had the old school revivals, you know, where they preached the hellfire brimstone messages, and I can remember a message on entire sanctification and feeling like that's what I needed in my life. I needed a total surrender in my life because there's things that I was holding on to. And it was at that moment when I surrendered my life and I said, God, I'm all in. Whatever you want me to do, I'm all in. And it was kind of that moment where I acknowledged that God's calling was on my life, and I was able to vocalize it and verbalize it to other people. What's interesting is all throughout those years, God used people to come up in my life who were just good, godly people. And they would say, you know, Mike, I don't know what it is, but I just feel like God has a calling on your life. And they always kept that in front of me, which I think helped me even kind of shape and develop that.
Yeah, well, and you fulfilled that calling, or you pursued that calling, and you went into ministry, and you've served in several different churches. Can you share some of the blessings and just the works that you've seen God do through your various ministry stops?
Yeah, definitely. You know, when I got into ministry, I think we all get into ministry for this reason, I hope, is that we want to be used by God to be a part of seeing lives changed. You know, I didn't get into ministry because I wanted to oversee this big organization. That was never on my radar. I really had a heart for people. I love people, and I wanted to be part of, and I think that goes back to growing up. You know, I saw people saved in our church. I saw lives changed. I saw people who had strongholds and addictions in their lives, and I saw them freed from it. You know, I saw miracles take place. And that's why I got into ministry. I wanted to be a part of that kind of work. I wanted to be part of God's work in people's lives. And so throughout the years, the highlights of all my ministry have never been, you know, speaking in front of big crowds, and I've had opportunities to speak in front of really big crowds. The highlights in all my ministry is when I've been able to be hands-on. God, out of His goodness, has allowed me to be a part of His work in somebody's life. And, you know, I look back at my ministry, and there's hundreds and hundreds of stories of how God used our church or my ministry to be part of a radical change in somebody's life. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I wasn't a sports guy growing up. I didn't play sports at a school, so I don't have like a trophy case. But, you know, I think about it often. If there could ever be a trophy case of just like names of lives change, I think I'd be so excited about, you know, knowing that God used me in a small way to help change people's lives. And so I think in all my ministry, that's what I always go back to. And it's in times where I've kind of lost focus of that life change, and you get more focused on this big organization. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's where I've wrestled with ministry.
Yeah. So. Yeah, well, that's encouraging, and I mean, think back of the people's lives that have been changed through God using you. That's powerful to realize and to remember that God, He can do that. He still is doing that. It's not the power that God displayed isn't something that happened a long time ago. He's still active in the world today. So thank you for sharing about that. One question I think people might be interested in: what things about ministry, is there anything that surprised you or things that maybe college didn't prepare you for, or anything in that category?
Yes. Things that surprised me is that not everybody thought the way I people don't think the way I think all the time, or I had people that disagreed with me. And I can remember, Jeff, coming out of school, and I don't know if you probably weren't like this because you were better than me, but I had all the answers, I knew how to do ministry. And I can even remember thinking, I started off as a youth pastor in my first church. And I can remember it creeping into my mind, and sometimes people would say it to me. Things like, Mike, I think you can do it better than our pastor. And I can remember thinking, yep, I think I can. And, a little bit of pride sneaks in there. And, well, then God, in his goodness, took care of that issue. He gave me my first church and humbled me very quickly. And I think what surprised me about ministry that they didn't prepare me for is that people are people, and people can be difficult. Mm-hmm. And even in the church world, I just assumed that everybody loved Jesus and loved each other, But the reality is, in the church world, it's not the case. It's unfortunately, sometimes things can get pretty messy, and relationships can get broken, and when sin creeps in, just ugly stuff can happen. And so I think probably when I look back at my ministry at the early age, I was surprised of how messy sometimes church can get.
Mm-hmm. Which I think part of it speaks to your parents' leadership, both in the church and home, of fostering positive, God-honoring environments. And so I think that part of it's a blessing that you went into it with that perspective.
I can say this, Jeff, and this was something that I didn't even realize growing up in it. My parents never talked bad about people in the church, ever. My dad has shared stories with me now that I've gotten into ministry, and he shared stories of how he handled certain things, and he would share stories about some tough issues that he would go through with people in the church. And when he would share it with me, I was blown away that he had conflict with those people, because my dad always spoke highly of them. Mm-hmm. And we didn't go home and talk about people at the dinner table. My dad was always very positive on how he talked about people, and he didn't bring that junk home. And you know what? As I look back at how my spiritual formation took place, I think that was a significant part of it, in that, my parents just didn't bring that mess into the house.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
That's great. Praise the Lord for your parents and just the influence in the church and in your home. Now, you have shifted in your vocation slightly, or at least your responsibilities, and you are now a district superintendent. Can you explain to us what that is?
I can't, Jeff. No. It's definitely a new position for me. What I do as a district superintendent is I oversee all the Nazarene churches in the state of Iowa, which is considered our district. So a district superintendent basically is an overseer of pastors and churches in a specific area. So I just oversee churches all across Iowa, and I figure out how I can support them and help them, and yeah.
And you've been doing that since August, so 9 months or so. And what do you think of the position? What are your first 9 months thoughts about it?
So my first 9 months are, it's so different than pastoring. There's things that I absolutely love about pastoring that I don't get to do right now. But I have to figure it out, because I still feel like God has called me to ministry, mm-hmm. and minister to this hurt, broken world. What I've discovered now is my job now, I'm working closely with pastors, and I'm working with church boards. I'm in a different church every weekend. It's hard to build solid relationships. It's hard to be able to invest into people's lives who are unchurched and don't know Christ, which I really wrestle with. It's often a lonely job. You go to a place and then you're off to another place and then you're off to another place, and so it's definitely it's different for sure than what I've been doing. And what I keep asking God is, you've called me to be part of your kingdom work, and I want to know that what I'm doing matters in the kingdom, matters in the bigger scheme of things, and I'm not just an overseer trying to check the box kind of work. Mm-hmm. And so what I've discovered with this job, one of the things that I really feel like I can be a service to the church is we have pastors that are discouraged and in tough situations and feel like they're lonely. And I feel a strong calling that I want to invest my life into them and pour into them and be an encouragement to them, and feel that the things that I've learned over the years, that God has taught me over the years, can benefit our pastors. And so I've just been working on trying to get to know our pastors, trying to dive into their family life, and just see ways that I can encourage and be a blessing and help to them.
Yeah, and you haven't been on the position a year, so I know there's a learning curve. You'll eventually get to the point where you establish relationships, but thank you for your transparency and some of the ways that you're processing this start to your position here. And whether we're talking about your role as a pastor in a local church or a district superintendent, what are some of the obstacles that you see churches facing today?
Yeah. Our culture has changed so quickly. And the things that, we held on to just a few years ago, has changed. And so what I see when I travel across Iowa right now and I go into these churches, I feel like there's some things that the church is holding on to very tightly, that is keeping many of them back from reaching the culture today. It's not that they're bad people or they're, it's not that they don't want to connect with their community or reach their community for Christ. I just see that they're holding on to some things that they don't need to hold on to any longer. And as they're holding on to these things, it's almost like they lost vision of what God has called the church to be in the community. And so I'd say many churches, not just in Iowa, but across our country, have just lost the sense of vision of what God has called us to be, the hands and feet of Christ in our community. Just to be brutally honest with you, Jeff, I feel like the church has lost her voice in this culture, because we're holding on to some of these things that we just don't need to hold on to any longer. And there are things that we love and things that we hold dearly to us, but we're sacrificing lives and souls over some of these things. And I think the church has got to address some of these issues.
I think that's an interesting perspective, because a lot of times the church can blame the culture or society for the problems the church is facing, but at some level, we've got to own what's happening.
Yeah, not to interrupt you, Jeff, but I feel like our culture is hungry for answers right now. They want truth. And if there's ever a group of people that should be full of grace and full of truth, it's the church. And I feel like people are wanting to have conversations. And I talk to them all the time, and although they're not jumping into a church building saying, hey, I'm wrestling with faith issues, I find out that people, when they lay their head on their pillow at night, they got all sorts of questions. They got all sorts of concerns. They got all sorts of fears in their life. And I feel like we got these great opportunities to have these conversations with people and connect them with a God who can radically change their life and give them hope in this hopeless world and give them peace in the midst of all this mess. And I think sometimes, and again, I'm not being hard on the church. Maybe I am a little bit, and that's okay. But I feel like we have become so concerned with our little huddles and so concerned with what's going on in culture and wringing our hands, and we've gotten so consumed with politics, and that we miss out on these great opportunities in our culture. And so I feel like our cultures, they're waiting for a group of people to step up and live this out and have conversations with them.
And I think what you're getting at is we have to put our words into action. I mean, most followers of Jesus will say the church is not the building, but yet we, as you said, we kind of revert back into our own group, whether it's a physical building or just our comfort zone or clique or whatever we want to term that as. But there are people, as you said, that are looking for answers, and I completely agree with you. But I thank you for articulating it in the way you did, and there are various ways that we can try to overcome those obstacles, and we have to be careful not to try to do what somebody else is doing because it worked for them. We have to figure out how we can connect with people. And part of it is living out the transforming work of Jesus in our own life and letting that see through. Because you kind of alluded to Jesus transforms. And how would you describe the importance of the fact that we believe that Jesus can transform? It's because we're trying to connect with people that don't know Jesus, and so we should be optimistic about the possibility of what Jesus can do. So how would you encourage people to focus on the transforming work of Jesus?
Jeff, what you just said is what the church has to get back to and figure out. We used to hear stories of how Jesus radically changed people's lives. We used to hear testimonies in the church where somebody would get up and say, listen, I was a disaster. And not that I have it all together now, but Christ did something so radical in my life that I'm a different person. Like, we use that language in the church because it's biblical. I'm born again. It's like I'm a new person. We don't talk that way anymore. We don't share stories like that anymore. In fact, even our preaching is like, hey, listen, here's 7 steps to how to get a handle on your, whatever issue it is. And we just try to mask some of the stuff going on in our lives. But what's so significant about our faith is we do believe exactly what you just said. Jesus changes everything. Mm-hmm. And it's not just to cover up your mess. He changes you from the inside out. He does something so significant inside of you that it literally begins to change who you are and your actions and how you speak. And I wonder often if we just missed that in the church as of late, mm-hmm. And then, we're looking to politicians to change our culture, and we fight over that. It depends on what part of the state I'm in. Some part of the state says, this side is the way, and the other state says this side is the way. And we're looking to these politicians to solve our issues. And that's creeped into the church, and we fight over that stuff in the church. And if you vote a certain way, then you can join our group. Mm-hmm. Which Scripture says, don't put your trust in these people. Yeah. Their plans are going to come to an end. Your hope is in God. And so I think, Jeff, you're exactly right on that. I think, again, back to the old school language, we need a real deal revival awakening in our churches again, where even people in the church are radically changed by Jesus Christ, to where we start to see people the way Jesus sees them, to where mm-hmm. we start to talk to people and we use the same language that Jesus would use, and I think we need to start seeing that in the church again, because apart from him, he was right when he said it. Apart from him, we can do nothing. Mm-hmm. And I think many of our churches are trying to operate apart from him. Yeah. And we're seeing the results of it.
Yeah, that's a challenging word that you've given us there. And I think challenging in a positive way. Sometimes we run from challenge and we think challenge is a bad thing, but I think it's important for us to find ways to be positively challenged. And the gospel confronts us. Yeah. The gospel is confrontational, no matter where you are in your spiritual journey. Because even those who thought they had it figured out, Jesus confronts them pretty regularly. But But anyway, I would like to conclude on a note of optimism. What's giving you hope right now? I mean,
Yeah.
you're traveling to various churches. It's a different perspective for you. But what's giving you hope right now?
Yeah, what's giving me hope is like, and if I came across as super negative, I didn't mean to do that, Jeff.
Oh,
But
you weren't. You weren't. I wasn't trying to
what,
say that, but I just want to
yeah,
end on a very
I
encouraging
get
note.
it. I get it. I think what's giving me hope is I do feel like um, the church is becoming less consumed about programs and um, the big productions. It's getting less concerned about those things and getting more concerned about diving into the lives of people and seeing that life change. Honestly, COVID, as messy as that was, I feel like that's kind of awakened the church to what matters most in the church. God has called us to go not only love Him with our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, but He called us to love each other. And I think what COVID revealed is the importance of relationships with people. Mm-hmm. And so what I see, what's exciting in the church world today is I feel like people are being awakened to the things that matter, and they're becoming less and less consumed with the things in the big scheme of things don't matter.
Yeah.
Which I feel like is exciting because I want my kids to grow up in a church that is focusing on the right things, and some of the other stuff that we thought was important just a few years ago, we're discovering really doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with that. That's great. Thank you for sharing that encouraging thought there. Is there anything else that you would like to share today? And I didn't want to cut you off, or maybe you had another thought on your heart.
I mean, I got all sorts of thoughts on my heart all the time, Jeff. So we could go all day if we needed to. But I don't know. Whoever listens to this, I just want to encourage them to dive into your relationship with Christ. I mean, if this next year, what if we all just made Him our priority over everything else? Over our businesses, over our money, over our politics. What if we just made Christ like the central figure of our lives, and we just said we're all in with it. We're all in. I think we can make a splash in this world.
Yeah.
And with all the messiness of what's going on, I just feel like people are looking for some truth and some hope and some love. And I'd say let's dive in and let's go do it.
Yeah. I agree. And if the individual followers of Jesus dive into Jesus, it's going to have a ripple effect and exponential effect throughout His kingdom. So. Well, Mike, thank you for taking time for us today. Thank you for sharing your heart and just your challenging and encouraging words. I appreciate you and your leadership. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.